Congratulations, DawgNation. We have made it to Friday. Yes, that does feel like an accomplishment given the fact we had a chance to see Georgia back on the field in Sanford Stadium tomorrow against Middle Tennessee State, the Blue Raiders. We will talk a lot about that on today's show. We'll have Jeff Sintel on a little bit later on as well. If you've been only focused on what's been going on with the team on the field as of late, you have missed a couple major recruiting notes involving big-time 4- and 5-star prospects for the 2019 class. Jeff will tell you about that. There's also a big-time UGA commit on TV tonight. We'll make sure you know all about that as well. We are incredibly busy today. We think it's going to be a really fun show as well. Kind of some interesting reflection, pretty introspective, which is probably a bigger word than I should be using, but introspective thoughts here from Kirby Smart on his focus and his drive and what he's trying to instill into the Georgia team as they get ready to go into what is, to at least some people's eyes, another paycheck game against Middle Tennessee State on Saturday. I think you'll like this off the top here today. I'm glad you're with us. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I don't know what made me think about this, but this morning I was kind of reflecting on the fact that next week will be, the 3-year anniversary of, actually maybe just the 2-year anniversary, just the 2-year anniversary of Georgia going to Ole Miss there in Oxford back in 2016 on a day that was about 150 degrees. The people will tell you there that we're at that game there at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, and Georgia absolutely got waxed by an Ole Miss team that was as average as grits. I mean, you want to talk about just one of the worst days that any Georgia fan can possibly remember. That mediocre Ole Miss team just walking up and down the field on Georgia all day long. It's really pretty amazing to think about how quickly things have changed for Georgia since then. I mean, the word standard gets thrown around a lot, and we're going to actually talk about that word in reference to another SEC program before we're done on today's show. But the idea of, hey, we're trying to set a standard, it means something to play for Georgia. Well, it's kind of amazing how quickly that those words, and Kirby Smart sort of uses those things, phrases like that from time to time. It's kind of amazing how quickly that has come to truly mean something. To not just be empty rhetoric, to not just be the kind of thing that you toss around and then go out and get waxed by Ole Miss. No, over the course of a couple of seasons here, Georgia has really become the kind of program that sort of backs up that talk week to week. So here we are on a Friday. Almost everyone who's either listening or watching me right now is a big Georgia fan. And there is virtually among, the entire fan base, no hesitancy whatsoever, no doubt whatsoever that Georgia's going to go out and do what it needs to against Middle Tennessee State. An inferior opponent, Georgia's going to go out and make them look inferior tomorrow. Georgia will win this game handily, almost by anyone's estimation. And it just wasn't that long ago, end of the Mark Richt tenure, the beginning of the Kirby Smart tenure, a million coaches before that, where, from week to week, stuff like this was very much in doubt. Would you see the best of Georgia, or would this be a team that sort of played down to the level of its competition? And obviously, Kirby Smart's the guy that gets a lot of the credit for that, for what we expect to see against Middle Tennessee State and what we expect to see against a bunch of other overmatched or SEC opponents here for much of the rest of the season. And it's not just the talent, although the talent obviously matters. It's also the level of preparation, the level of focus and intensity that Georgia seems to not just approach every game with, but every practice with. Attack the day is another one of those things that it gets said so much that it almost feels like a cliche. But when you really do truly live your life that way, it's not a cliche. Yes, it may sort of have it may ring in our ears like a bumper sticker or like just some sort of, touchy-feely, motivational phrase. But if it's actually sort of a life's mission, then the results are going to be what they have been for Georgia as of late and what I expect them to be for Georgia on Saturday against Middle Tennessee State. And Kirby Smart talked about some of that this week, the sort of process-oriented way in which he goes about his business. Not worrying about the end result, because sometimes end results can be misleading. Sometimes a good final score can maybe trick you into thinking you played better than you did. But for Kirby, it's more about the sort of day-in, day-out grind, the step toward perfection, or the step towards excellence, and every single day. And that's one of the reasons why I think Georgia fans can feel confident with what they're going to see tomorrow against Middle Tennessee State. In fact, here is Kirby in the week before a game that may get out of hand once again, 40-something to nothing or 45-10, whatever it's going to end up being against Middle Tennessee State. Kirby says he's going to approach the game and every facet of the game, every moment of the game, just as intensely as he does every other, no matter what the final score is. This is cool stuff from Kirby as you get ready for the Blue Raiders tomorrow. Here he is.
I certainly coach from the beginning whistle to the end whistle exactly the same all the time because I don't think the scoreboard matters. So if the scoreboard doesn't matter, why, if we're down 25-30, whatever we were down at Ole Miss, should I be coaching different than if we're up 25 or 30 against somebody at home? I just don't see the difference in that because I believe in what we tell the players, which is playing to that standard and playing like the scoreboard's not there. So if you coach the same way, then the expectation for the player that goes in, whether you're up or down, is exactly the same.
There's that word again, the idea of a standard. And like I said, for a lot of coaches, a lot of programs in college football, that just becomes empty rhetoric. But for Georgia, it's a lot more than that. And Kirby actually said something post-game on Saturday, kind of to that effect of, a game like South Carolina becomes easier because practices are harder than the games. And that really is what the Georgia standard has sort of been about. Compete against each other, good on good at practice every single day. And when you go out and play an opponent, whether it be a non-Power 5 opponent like Middle Tennessee State this week or a SEC East rival like South Carolina last week, all of a sudden that opponent on Saturday is going to actually be a whole lot easier. It's fun to play the game when you work all week in practice. But if you goof off and have fun during practice, the games themselves become way more work than they need to be. And, as Georgia sort of moves into, after this week, it gets into SEC play here for much of the balance of the rest of 2018. It's that level of competition that's been instilled into the hearts and minds of these players during practice that I think prepares Georgia for that. And with that in mind, even, this week, with the season after this week, it's the 25% of the way over. The first quarter poll of the season will be passed, but for the Georgia program, the mindset hasn't changed at all, even though we're kind of into the season now, whether it was in August or back during spring practice. That competition during practice that made beating South Carolina easy, that same level of focus and competition is continuing during Georgia practices right now. Here's more from Kirby Smart on that subject.
I've got my message set for the team today, and it's really about that alone. It's not anything about who we play, nor any disrespect for Middle Tennessee. It's totally about us and competing within practice. We've got some really good competitions going on where guys are battling for playing time, guys are battling for spots, and the best way to measure that is not against a scout team player, but against a good-on-good situation, which every day, including today, we'll do good-on-good situations and try to find out where guys are and continue to earn playing time. I think the only way you develop your team towards the end goal, which is to be as good as you can possibly be by the end of the season, is to improve during the season. And that's where I think we can separate ourselves because we can improve during the season. We have enough depth to go against each other and continue to improve, and that's the end goal for us.
Now, there's a reason why I'm starting the show this way, talking about this subject, talking about this topic, is because this isn't just sort of puffery, another reason to brag on Georgia, another excuse for patting Kirby Smart on the back. He gets enough of that as it is, probably from this show as much as anywhere else. But the point of all this competition during practice and intensity during games, no matter what the final score is, it's actually producing some tangible results for UGA, something we're going to see back on the field again on Saturday. And let's once again go back to last week here for a moment. For a lot of programs who kind of show up on the ESPN postgame show on Saturday night or get talked about on ESPN's College Game Day in the morning, for a lot of programs who think of themselves as sort of top 10 national contenders, if their starting left tackle had left a game early in the second half, that's all anybody would have talked about. Andrew Thomas's injury could have been the front page of every newspaper in the state of Georgia and the lead topic on DawgNation Daily all week long in normal situations for normal college football teams. But Kirby Smart's established a standard at practice where the competition level has produced a capable backup. We saw Cade Mays. Yes, Mays is, of course, a five-star freshman, so he's an elite recruit. But we saw him step in and play pretty well in place of Andrew Thomas. And as Kirby Smart explains, you don't get that from Mays unless he's been through the ringer the way that he's been through in the month of September and in August before that, and all the way back to January when he was practicing with the Georgia Bulldogs before the national championship game. The work done at practice makes Mays capable and eligible to kind of come in and provide capable replacement for Andrew Thomas. So all of this is, frankly, part of the plan for Kirby Smart, and the results sort of speak for themselves, maybe with Cade Mays, who's likely to play once again for Andrew Thomas on Saturday. In fact, here is what Kirby said on that subject about Cade Mays earlier in the week.
I was excited for Cade as much as I was disappointed for Andrew because Cade's worked hard. He's came in at mid-year, worked really hard. The biggest reaction I had was I'm glad we practice the way we do. I'm glad that he has to go against really good players day in and day out, so that's not unusual for him. And he did some good things when he went in. I think the overwhelming consent was when he went in that it just took over. A lot of that had to do with the body blows that occurred before that. But he had some mistakes, and he did some things that weren't real good, but he did some good things. Find positive in it, but also find area for improvement.
So listen, here's the bottom line for me on this entire discussion. I did admit this earlier this week. There is an element of Georgia versus Middle Tennessee State on Saturday, a non-Power 5 opponent coming the week after you began SEC play that sort of leaves something for me to be desired. I will admit I'm having to sort of manufacture my own excitement about this game. Middle Tennessee State's not exactly the opponent that you wish you were playing probably on this particular Saturday, but while it's not the best team Georgia could play, it is an opportunity once again to see Georgia at its best, to see the focus and intensity that's become the hallmark of this program, sort of spoken into existence by Kirby Smart and then instilled into the beliefs of really all these players. Yes, there is a level of confidence that I think that Georgia fans can have about tomorrow's game. They know their team will show up and be as advertised, and it's probably a pretty good preview for what we're going to see starting next Saturday when the SEC schedule really gets rolling. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Marco's Pizza. We're really glad to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or in podcast form. Pretty much wherever you can find podcasts, you can find DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. I'm talking about the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player there for the Android devices, SoundCloud, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad to have you with us. And speaking of Marco's Pizza, I know for many of you, Thursday, sort of that unofficial start to the weekend. You sit in front of the TV last night, watch some football. By the way, how about 3 touchdowns for A.J. Green last night? Good stuff there from the former Georgia wide receiver for the Bengals there against Baltimore. I know many of you sort of settle in and watch that football with a little Marco's Pizza. And why would you not when you can take advantage of a great offer like 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each? It's every store, every day, the Italian way. You can get it at marcos.com. So say hello primo this weekend, whether it's a tailgate or, listen, around the weekend watching football. Enjoy yourself a little authentic Italian quality pizza every store, every day, the Italian way, there at marcos.com. We've got a Jeff Sintel here coming up. A lot of info to get into with Jeff. As I mentioned to our video audience off the top of our program a couple of minutes ago, if you've been only focused on what's going on with the team on the field right now, there are a couple major developments, potentially anyway, with some elite 4- and 5-star prospects for the 2019 class. We'll kind of get into some of that here with Jeff in just a little bit. We've also got our Kroger checklist coming up as well. We'll give you all the information you need about all the things happening around Athens tomorrow. We'll do that here coming up in a moment, too. Before that, let me confess something here. I was really fascinated last week by the sort of, aftermath of Demetrius Robertson. How much did he play? How much did he not play against South Carolina on Saturday? Kirby Smart talked about that. He was asked about that a lot. Gary Danielson talked about that on the CBS broadcast. So much so that I've spent a lot of the last couple of days crunching some numbers. I went back and rewatched the entire Austin Peay game, rewatched the entire South Carolina game. I'm going to be writing that up and presenting that at DawgNation.com as I buy the numbers piece later on here today in terms of what Robertson has done, what he hasn't done, maybe what he needs to do more of to be more part of the Georgia offense. It's actually really fascinating when you go back and rewatch games. Many of you probably done this before. When you isolate just one position group, watch the full South Carolina game yesterday, watching nothing but the wide receivers. The full Austin Peay game the day before, watching nothing but the wide receivers. And you really see some interesting stuff when you just watch that one position group. And maybe, focusing in closely on Demetrius Robertson, maybe it becomes a little easier to understand why he hasn't been a bigger part of the offense, with the exception of the one handoff that he took for a touchdown against Austin Peay. Maybe you do see some glimpses of maybe him not quite being physical enough. And it really ends up being a really interesting comparison to another guy who got some praise from Kirby Smart this week, Tyler Simmons, who, as a recruit coming out of high school, he was at McEachern for his final year. For a recruit coming out of high school, Simmons was nowhere near as lauded as Demetrius Robertson was. But thus far, Simmons has been a bigger part of the Georgia offense than the former 5-star freshman All-American transfer Robertson. What has enabled Tyler Simmons to be as big a part of the Georgia offense as he's been for 2 games? I thought this week Kirby Smart gave some pretty interesting praise on that. Here is Kirby talking about why Tyler Simmons has impressed.
Well, I think physicality is a learned trait that he's learned over the course of time. First of all, he has a stature and body that's 200 pounds. He's thick, he's physical, he's tough. Basically, we're not going to play you if you don't do that. So the reward is I get to play in the game and catch the ball if I block. And he had not one, but two really good blocks. Everybody saw the one on Miko's, but the DeAndre Swift run, he knocked his guy to the ground early in the game as well. So he's proven to be a physical blocker. He catches the ball well. He's got good speed. He's built like a running back, and if he continues to get better and practice better, he can be a really good player for us.
So if I had to guess, those words of praise for Tyler Simmons may be a contrast for some other Georgia receivers who may not be quite doing that enough right now. Good stuff from Kirby on that, and great stuff on the field from Tyler Simmons thus far. Speaking of on the field, let's set you up for everything that's going to happen in Athens tomorrow. Let's do our Kroger checklist here. Of course, a game time change. Initially supposed to be 7:15, moves it up to noon. That means for our Kroger checklist, change in the dog walk here as well. Dog walk now 9:45 a.m. for those of you who are wondering. We'll have live coverage here on the DawgNation video channels. But for those of you in Athens, 9:45 tomorrow for the dog walk. Kickoff now against Middle Tennessee State is at noon, right after the game. No difference for us, though. We'll have our Northside Hospital postgame show from the UGA bookstore immediately after the game. So come on by and see me, former Georgia punter Cameron Nizelek, as we do the Northside Hospital postgame show immediately after the game from the UGA bookstore. And that's an update on everything happening in Athens tomorrow as a part of our Kroger checklist. And speaking of Kroger, come join your local Kroger chef for a guided kids cooking experience, including an apron and patch, a chef's hat, recipe card, and tongs. It's all just $7. And in September, Kroger Chef Jr. is going to be featuring black bean salsa on Saturday, September 22nd. You can visit KrogerChefJr.com. That's KrogerChefJr.com to find your closest Kroger and reserve your spot. So it's great to have Kroger as a part of the Kroger checklist here on DawgNation Daily. Also great to have Jeff Sintel as well. A lot of recruiting info to get into with Jeff. Glad to have you a part of it as we do it here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always fun to say hello to my buddy Jeff Sintel here on a Friday on DawgNation Daily to kind of wrap up the events of the week when it comes to UGA recruiting and a little bit of a look ahead to the weekend here as well. Jeff, good morning to you. Thanks for being a part of our program. Hope you're doing well today.
Good morning, Brandon. Hope everybody's well. Do I have to talk about Sirius and cumulus clouds and approaching weather fronts during my segment today?
Yeah, no, hopefully we've turned the page on that. Now it's sort of back to football after the weather stuff has sort of calmed down. I don't think there's going to be a cloud in the sky in Athens all day tomorrow, but nonetheless, I guess that's a different subject for a different day. Georgia is going to be at noon. We'll talk to you coming up in a moment how that might impact some of the recruits who are looking or hoping to make their way to Athens for the game here tomorrow. But let me begin with something else, if you don't mind. Fascinating profile of five-star offensive lineman Clay Webb with you at the Sintel Intel at DawgNation.com. We were also able to sort of feature a great video of Webb on Before the Hedges this week, presented by Kroger. I thought this was one of our best editions of Before the Hedges this week with both Webb and Tyree Stevenson, who we'll have more on in a moment here. But really, really great video work from you there in Oxford, Alabama with Clay Webb. And obviously, Jeff, this is a story that you and I have sort of talked about for kind of a while now, and I have expressed some skepticism about the likelihood that Webb will end up leaving the state of Alabama. I did think it was really telling, both in terms of your comments on Before the Hedges, Webb's comments to you, that, hey, maybe when you think about a challenger to Georgia here for Webb, it's not so much, an Alabama or an Auburn. Like, it may be another out-of-state program like Clemson here, which just sort of lends some credibility to the idea maybe Clay Webb really is looking to sort of go east with his college career here. What did you make of the one-on-one that you were able to have with Webb earlier this week?
Well, to me, we said this on BTH earlier this week, Brandon. To me, it sort of feels like not only is Clemson a big player, but to me it kind of feels like maybe even Auburn and Clemson, maybe it seems like there's more sentiment right now for that school, for those two schools, along with Georgia, rather than the in-state juggernaut Alabama. I think that's one of many takeaways I got from that conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly really interesting. And Jeff, I guess I'll just follow up on this with one point as well. Do you think? I know Webb told you that he'd rather play guard than center. Almost all the official recruiting services list him as a center. If he did come to Georgia, do you think that Georgia would give him a chance to play guard, or no matter what his preference is, he's going to end up being a center wherever he goes?
Well, I think what his thing is, center has a lot of responsibilities. Everybody sees Big Lamont do that for Georgia every week. You got to diagnose edge pressure. You've got to identify the mic. You got to align some protection. There's a lot of things that the center has to do. Is definitely the quarterback of the offensive line. Besides just snapping the ball normally or snapping the ball in a shotgun set. So Webb just feels right now more comfortable with center, maintaining his assignment, maintaining his gap, than all the many nuances that go along with center. He sounds like he'd rather start out at guard and play guard, but yet at the same time he realizes that about 6'3", 295 pounds, with good lateral movement and good quickness, he also carries a 3.4 GPA, that he does understand that perhaps his best long-term position, and now when I mean long-term, I'm just going to say it, something he can get paid for 10 years in the NFL doing, it's much more likely for him to be doing that at a center position, rather than at the guard spot. So you would see like a transition if he chooses the right program, where maybe they start him out at guard and work his way into playing center. I know a lot of programs, a lot of offensive line coaches in college football, they get really, really nervous when they think about playing a true freshman at center, no matter how talented he is.
All right, I want to talk to you about a different guy, another elite prospect, the four-star defensive back Tyree Stevenson. We also featured him this past week on Before the Hedges. I know you'll be writing a lot about him in the days ahead there in your Centel Intel at DawgNation.com. And I guess, Jeff, what I find fascinating about Stevenson right now, and of course you know that I want Stevenson to be a part of this 2019 Georgia class, and as a way of feeling hopeful about that, it's not so much what he says about Georgia, although he's certainly very complimentary of the Dogs, having been at the reveal and developed some close bonds with some of the players and coaches there as a part of that. It's what he sort of doesn't say about any other program here. I mean, he obviously has some nice things to say about Miami, but, Jeff, and we'll read more of the quotes from you when you write about this at DawgNation.com, but it's sort of the absence of competitors for Georgia right now that makes me feel the best about the likelihood that Stevenson ends up in this 2019 class. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, to me, he feels like he's got a good base of knowledge about Georgia and a good base of knowledge about Miami. Miami's the in-state school close by, nearby. Got a lot of guys he knows, guys that he's been on teams with, 7-on-7 squads with. A lot of guys he knows are at Miami. Visits that program and that campus frequently. Not even just a recruiting visit, just to kind of hang out with those guys. And then you have Georgia, who he's been to a lot of times. He was at the reveal. He even cut the ribbon. He was one of those marquee recruits that got to cut the ribbon to the new West End Zone and the new recruiting lounge and everything else like that. He also, Brandon, gets a lot of interesting information from his South Florida connections to the Georgia team. That's guys like James Cook. That's guys like Tyson Campbell. That's guys like Devon Wilson. They give him all the reassurances in the world about what he's seeing at Georgia. It's not just puff and show and just what Georgia looks like for him when a big recruit's in town. They've let him know what Georgia is like on the regular, and it's something he is definitely warming to about the potential of playing in Athens. And wouldn't it be weird, Brandon? I don't know, weird. Maybe there's a clever fella out there that will eventually concoct a nickname. If Georgia does one day, if they do get Tyree Stevenson, and then maybe an eventual cornerback pairing looks like Tyson Campbell on one side and Tyreek Stevenson on the other. That's a lot. There's some sort of fun language there that could be happening with the two ties lining up at corner for Georgia. Maybe that's the tie me up defense at Georgia or something like that. Lockdown. Very interesting about how Georgia's recruiting so well right now in South Florida, especially at the cornerback position.
I think you're right about that. Do me a quick favor. Compare Tyreek Stevens to some of these other defensive backs here for a moment, because as you reported for a long time, well before DJ Daniel chose South Carolina, Tyreek Stevenson was still a big-time priority for Georgia. So Daniel, his choice to go somewhere else has no impact on Stevenson whatsoever. I'll give a lot of our DawgNation daily viewers credit here, because in our comment section, back when I was obsessed by the Andrew Booth, we had plenty of Georgia fans who were comment to our shows and say, no, it's Stevenson, the guy that you really need to be paying attention to. So when you sort of look at some of the other defensive backs that we've spent a lot of time talking about here on a DawgNation Daily, how do you compare Stevenson to a Booth or a Daniel or a Kyrie Lam, some of the other guys that we've sort of mentioned in this space here before? How do you compare Stevenson to those guys?
I think they're all basically very elite prospects. All those guys are really, really good. That the type of player that could play for Georgia or any national program in their freshman years. I like the adaptability of Stevenson, where he's already 6'1", and 200 pounds, 205 pounds, can play safety, can play star, can play the coverage star, could even play the run fit star for Georgia, and also can definitely be a freshman corner or one of those lockdown corners. I think Stevenson, he's already the nation's number 5 cornerback and the number 41 prospect overall on the 24/7 Sports composite for this year. I think he's just as good. I would put him right there up with Booth. He's going to be a little bit bigger than Booth, so naturally he'll hold up a little bit better in the run game. I think Booth has elite everything, especially elite ball skills, the type of guy that can take a pick and then crisscross the field for a touchdown. I think Booth is a very special player on his way to Clemson. Everybody knows that. But I also think that Tyree Stevenson in his own right belongs in that same category, right in the same class with Andrew Booth. I think Booth, Daniel, Tyree Stevenson, Khairi Elam, I think all those guys are elite cornerbacks in the class of 2019. And as long as Georgia can find one or two of those names on their roster come the fall of 2019, I think that shows that Georgia is recruiting the cornerback spot at an elite level once again.
You mentioned a potential nickname if Campbell and Stevenson were both starters together in the Georgia secondary. Aren't they both from the 305 area code? So I feel like we got to do something with the 305 in there, right? That's what the kids like, right?
Something like that. There's got to be something in terms of the ties, because both of their first names are so similar. Tyreek, the son.
Yeah.
When your assignment as a cornerback, you're supposed to tie your man up or to lock your man down or something like that. Give me a few weeks to work on that. I might come up with something about the two ties, but that would be very interesting if eventually a future Georgia secondary has 5-star Tyson Campbell from South Florida on one side, and then Tyree Stevenson, likely 5-star, already a high 4-star on the other side. Both of those guys are from South Florida. Both of those guys are from the 305. That would be very interesting if Georgia could pair those boys up one day.
Yeah, I mean, there was a secondary before that was sort of called the no-fly zone, right? Maybe you could have like the no-fly ties or something like that. You know, that's probably corny, but you'll probably end up being better at this than I am, I guess, Jeff.
Maybe a working one is like the tie one on secondary or something like that. We got to get to something, and hey, feel free for everybody else on the stream to play along as well.
Speaking of playing along, we'd love to have you play along with us this upcoming Thursday. That's right, September 20th. DawgNation going to be back at Marlos again. The Marlos in Brookhaven for our DawgNation big game preview, looking ahead to the game between Georgia and Missouri, but that's not all. There that night at the Brookhaven location of Marlos, 3575 Durden Drive. Starting at 6 p.m., our buddy Mike Griffith going to be on hand for that. Many of you have said, hey, bring out Mike to another DawgNation event. So this upcoming Thursday at the Marlos in Brookhaven, our buddy Mike Griffith is going to be there from 6 to 8 p.m. for our DawgNation big game preview, looking ahead to the Dogs' road trip to Columbia, Missouri. And if that wasn't enough, also very excited to announce that the winner of our DawgNation invasion to Baton Rouge, courtesy of Marlos, the giveaway they've been running here over the last few days, which is still ongoing, by the way. Go to DawgNation.com. And you can still sign up if you haven't yet. The winner of that is going to be announced at Marlos next Thursday. So it all goes down next Thursday at September 20th, just a little bit less than a week from right now, at the Marlos in Brookhaven for our DawgNation Big Game Preview. Come out and hear the secrets of what's been going on at practice with Mike Griffith. We'll do a live broadcast starting at 7. If you show up in the red and black, you get a free appetizer. A lot of fun, and we'll announce the winner of our DawgNation invasion. Courtesy of Marlos there that night at the Marlos in Brookhaven. Really looking forward to that. Jeff, something else that I'm looking forward to is something you've reported on at DawgNation.com this week. And once again, this was a story we kind of you broke on Before the Hedges on a Wednesday afternoon, which is that John Emery Jr., the 5-star running back, the UGA commit, LSU trying to put the full court press on him right now. But he's, I guess, apparently shaking a lot of that off. And he's got his next visit scheduled to Georgia, the first game, I believe, that he's seen there in Sanford Stadium. Jeff, tell us what you have learned about the visit plans here coming up for 5-star running back John Emery Jr.
Yeah, so John Emery Jr., I want to watch to see how many other visits he takes. I know LSU is going to be prevalent in trying to flip him away and keep him home. But the Emery family does seem pretty secure with their ties to Georgia. I remember his father told me a while back that they don't want to wish their son's life away, but they can't wait for him to be signed, sealed, and delivered and in college in January, and that's in Athens, so he can move on to this next phase of his life, because there's still a pretty big bubble of stress around him right now with all the moves he makes, his health, and also just all the recruiting buzz and attention he continues to receive, because the young man is a highlight factory. I think we could probably dedicate a segment of our Before the Hedges show each week to just showing the highlight plays from John Emery's games from the previous Friday. But he's going to be in Athens for the Tennessee game. Let's get to that point right there. That's going to be an unofficial visit. He also plans, and that's going to be a huge visit weekend with guys like Lewis Seen, Trouble Davis coming in as well. Most of the marquee out-of-state commitments are trying to line up and come to that game. Really, the big visit plateaus for the Bulldogs to show off that new West end zone this year. Looks like it's the Tennessee game, looks like it's the Auburn game, and maybe a little bit less to a lesser degree the Georgia Tech game. Those are the big visit weekends that look like for this season, which are the big, huge SEC opponent game weekends. But he's also going to make his official visit after the season, and that's something that Kirby's kind of go-to standard operating procedure for Coach Smart and the staff has been. Those long-time commitments, their officials take place after the year, so there's more personal attention, there's more fun things the staff can do, especially now with that new West end zone and the new recruiting lounge. Nobody's going to really be taking those big steak dinners anymore from the president's box or at the top of the press box area anymore at Georgia from those luxury boxes. That'll be really interesting what they can do with the West end zone. And then that's also the time when like a marquee recruit or three that's undecided also gets to come into town and maybe cement a lot of those really good feelings they're having about the University of Georgia.
One of Georgia's top 2019 commits is going to be showcased on national television tonight, Jeff. I want to finish by talking to you about that. Let me squeeze in one more thing before we get there, though. As you mentioned kind of off the top here, the game change for tomorrow is supposed to be originally 7:15 p.m. Weather moves this up to noon, or the threat of maybe impending weather moves this up to noon. This probably was not going to be a huge day for Georgia hosting recruits as it is. The fact that you change it to an earlier start time, given the fact that a lot of these players will be playing late Friday night games, is this going to impede a lot of prospects' opportunity to get to Athens for the game on Saturday, you think?
Yeah, let me kind of take that question there in a bunch of different ways to kind of give you, everybody out there, as much information as possible. Just take it from the aspect first of a typical fan. Everybody knows that the dog walk takes place 2 hours roughly before kickoff, so that means dog walk around 9:45, 10 a.m. That also means if you want to get your spot on the dog walk, you likely have to be there by 9. If you want to be at the Tate Center by 9, that means you probably need to be driving into Athens around 7:30, 7:45. Not a good thing to be looking at in terms of the early start, especially when marquee recruits have a game on Friday night where they usually don't get home until 11:30 or 12. What it does, though, is it's opened up a visit window a little bit because of an off weekend for quarterback John Rice Plumlee. That's the 4-star athlete, the only 2019 quarterback in the class who is in line to be the number 3 quarterback at Georgia, at least the 3rd scholarship quarterback at Georgia. He's leaving in a few minutes, he told me. He will be in Athens this weekend. That will be a good chance for everybody to see John Rice Plumlee for the first time and for him to check out Georgia and Sanford Stadium for the first time. I keep waiting for a big visit to happen from Andy Boykin. That's the flip candidate now that he's decommitted from Auburn in the 2020 class. I spoke to him earlier. He tells me that he will not be in Athens this weekend. He's got a wedding to attend. So still, I know a lot of folks are wondering what's happening there with Georgia and Andy Boykin and when he might make his next trip to Athens. He's told me that he will not be in Athens this weekend. He's got a wedding to attend. So I don't expect a huge visit weekend. I would imagine a lot of the diehard dogs in the class will be there. Maybe a Dominic Blaylock. Maybe J.T. Bertrand, who hasn't made it up to Athens lately, will get there. Rylan Godey, Travon Walker, a lot of the nearby Georgia commitments. I would expect a lot of those guys to be there. But not going to be a huge visit weekend to see Georgia take on Middle Tennessee by any means.
You mentioned Dominic Blaylock. Let's finish with this, Jeff. I'm really excited about this tonight. ESPNU Walton against North Gwinnett, and as you know, for Blaylock, this is actually a pretty interesting test because while the North Gwinnett, defensive backs didn't necessarily, I think, end up on Georgia's radar all that much in terms of, a whole lot of recruiting interest, they've got, at least 3 guys from that North Gwinnett secondary they're going to play major college football. So to see the 5-star receiver Blaylock battling the North Gwinnett secondary, that's pretty good TV tonight on ESPNU, is it not?
Yeah, it's good. And Dominic Blaylock is another highlight factory, another 5-star receiver. And the North Gwinnett secondary, I think, if anybody really wants to act like a smart thinking man about Georgia recruiting, remember Georgia offered all 3 of those guys, but never really finished in the top 3 or the top 2 for a lot of those guys. I think that's because Georgia had their eyes on bigger targets, more higher-rated targets in the class of 2019 at defensive back. And when you look at those guys, they're all really, really good players. So that says a lot about maybe what Georgia was trying to do or what Georgia maybe felt like they already had in the class of 2019. You've got one of those gentlemen who's committed to Tennessee. One of those moved away to IMG Academy to finish out their senior year. He's committed to Michigan. So I do think it shows a little bit for Georgia to go away from 3 very talented in-state defensive back targets and defensive back prospects. It says that, number one, Georgia's going to go get the very best players, maybe not the most convenient or the easiest to recruit players. And that means if they get a guy from Texas, if they get a guy from South Florida, if they get 2 guys from South Florida, they get a guy from Louisiana, that's what they're going to do. Another reason why Georgia's 2019 class looks like it will have just as many out-of-state prospects in the fold as in-state prospects when all is said and done.
Should be really fun with Dominic Blaylock on ESPNU tonight. That's the guy that's really put together some great highlights thus far in the senior season. I can't wait to see it. Jeff, thanks for being on with us today to talk about it. We always appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marcus Pizza. We love the Centel Intel. I'm looking forward to seeing you again on Wednesday for Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. And then, of course, all day tomorrow, all around Sanford Stadium. Jeff, I'll look forward to seeing you there as well.
All right, guys, stay dry. Have yourselves a very great weekend, and we'll see everybody in Athens down tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Great stuff from Jeff Centel. Really appreciate him being a part of the program. And, boy, don't you love the fact that, Jeff had no idea I was going to ask him the question about who's visiting and whatnot. And yet he drops the information of, I just got off the phone with John Rice Plumlee, and I've been talking to Andy Boykin. And, listen, that's a guy that goes out there and does the work every single week, man. Talking to the recruits that matter here to give us the information that we need. That's why I love Jeff Centel here on both DawgNation Daily every single week and, of course, at DawgNation.com as well. Really good stuff from him on that front. Let me do SEC Through here, though, and remind you once again that this is another week for you to get some action down. And, listen, that makes watching the games a whole lot more fun when you got a little action on the table there. And, of course, if you want to do that, you want to go to the place where the pros play, MyBookie. The reason why we like MyBookie here at DawgNation Daily and why it's the only service we would recommend is because they're known for the fast, no-hassle payout. There's nothing worse than, you celebrate and you're the winner, and then you go check your account and, the stuff is just not coming in, like it's supposed to. Well, MyBookie, that's never going to be a problem. And even better than that right now, if you use the promo code DawgNation, your first deposit can be matched dollar for dollar. So simply find MyBookie online. That's MyBookie. Find MyBookie online. Use the promo code DawgNation. Your first deposit can be matched dollar for dollar. You play, you win, you get paid. But you got to use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG. And, of course, that's when you find MyBookie online. All right, I am fascinated tomorrow about the LSU-Auburn game. I just think this is going to be a really interesting showcase for, frankly, the 2 teams that Georgia plays later on this season that are probably the toughest games all year long. I told you yesterday as part of our MyBookie Best Bets that I do like Auburn in this game, and one of the reasons why I do is because of the way that the LSU offense has struggled, especially in the second half last week against a nobody opponent. Apparently someone else that's also noticed this is our buddy Brad Nessler, who's going to call the game for CBS, being quoted by AL.com on LSU and its quarterback Joe Burrow, the Ohio State transfer, who was supposed to be the savior of this offense. But after last week, maybe that's not true. Here is an example of Brad Nessler maybe damning Burrow with faint praise here. Let me show you the quote here from AL.com, where Brad very candidly says, "I'm not trying to put Joe Burrow down, but when I watch film of LSU, I see Danny Etling with a different number. You'll remember Etling was LSU's quarterback last year in the last couple of years. He says he's Danny Etling with a different number. It's just another Ohio State transfer that can kind of manage the game. That's Brad Nester, AL.com. Of course, Etling was a Purdue transfer, but you get the point here that it's a transfer from the Big Ten who is just sort of a game manager. Now, I think LSU fans were hoping for more than that from Joe Burrow, especially given the talent that LSU seemingly has at the wide receiver position. And it could be that we're going on like year as far back as anybody can count of LSU having a good defense and not much offense. It is amazing. Multiple offensive coordinators, a head coaching change, and yet this is still sort of the story for LSU, a talented roster that can't find a quarterback. Now, maybe Joe Burrow plays better than that. I would assume there's no chance in the world he outplays Jarrett Stidham tomorrow. But obviously, this is the talk about Burrow right now, a couple of weeks ahead of Georgia's visit there coming up later on in October. I'll also remind you, if you're on the fence about who you think is going to win this game, don't forget how good Auburn played at home last year against Alabama, how good Auburn played at home last year against Georgia. I can promise you this, that the 2017 version of Georgia is miles and miles from a talent perspective ahead of this version of LSU. So if Auburn was good enough to beat Georgia last November in Jordan-Hare, I think it could get semi-ugly between Auburn and LSU tomorrow. Another big SEC game for tomorrow is Alabama and Ole Miss. At Ole Miss, a lot of points expected to be scored here. Ole Miss, of course, beat Alabama back in 2014 at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. And that brings to mind a pretty interesting stat that the folks from the SEC Network published for us here this week. Let me show you this on Twitter for those of you watching. Of course, if you're listening, I'll read this to you. The SEC Network giving us a pretty cool stat in terms of Ole Miss's success against Alabama. What the SEC Network says is that Alabama's regular season record since 2014, 48-1 against everybody but Ole Miss, just 2-2 against the Rebels. Of course, Ole Miss won back-to-back in 2014 and 2015. As I said, the 2014 game there at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, the 2015 game there at Bryant-Denny Stadium. What an amazing mark there for Ole Miss. You almost wonder, is this just some sort of weird fluke? Or is this an example of Ole Miss back when Hugh Freeze was the head coach there, who somehow knew the secret to, whatever it was that made Alabama tick here? Given the fact that Ole Miss has beaten Alabama twice, that doesn't change my opinion on this game, whatsoever. I still think this is probably an easy Alabama win. I'm not quite so sure they win by 3 touchdowns necessarily, but this is the kind of thing that I don't think this version of Ole Miss, even though they can score a lot of points, is probably good enough to challenge Alabama. But pretty fascinating to think that really the only team that's had any real success beating Alabama in the regular season over the last few years has been Ole Miss. A couple other stories to get to here. Alabama's making a kicking change on Saturday. You may have seen, some extra points, dink and doink all over the place. They missed a couple last week. There is a new kicker in place there for the Crimson Tide. This is another one of those stories that never seems to change, much like the LSU quarterback. Alabama seemingly never has a kicker that it trusts, and I guess here in 2018, we're kind of dealing with the same thing there as well. And before we wrap up the SEC through, let me also share this. And this is another one of those things that's, for the video audience, you'll be able to see this. For the non-video audience, I'll try to explain this to you. So Florida's getting ready to play our buddy Mike Bobo in Colorado State on Saturday. And how about the courageous way that he's fighting through his health issues at the moment? But, of course, for Florida, this game comes on the heels of losing for the first time in 31 years to the Kentucky Wildcats. Maybe not the world's best time to produce a video where you talk about the Florida standard, but that's exactly what Florida's done here this week. Let me show you some of the video for those of you who are watching. If you are listening, I'll describe it to you. So it's a lot of cool edits and elements and things of that nature, and the audio over and over again is talking about play to that standard, be the Florida standard. Let's be as good as Florida's always supposed to be. When you watch this, especially in comparison to what we talked about with Georgia off the top of the show, I mean, you really get the sense of what empty rhetoric really looks like, right? I know for the random Florida fan who happens to be tuned in right now, or the skeptical Georgia fan who just assumes that I'm so much of a Gator hater that I can't give Florida the benefit of the doubt on anything. I think videos like this, though, really are another example of what not to like about Florida. The fact that for Dan Mullen, it really sort of is all about empty words. And it really was sort of a attempt to gloss over a roster that was in pretty lousy shape. And all of a sudden now, from a lot of the national media members I'm hearing about, well, you know what? Maybe it's a rebuild there for Dan Mullen. Maybe Jim McElwain left this in worse shape than we thought he did. But the writing was on the wall before the season even started. We said on this show this wasn't a talented roster, and there's only so much coaching up a coach is going to be able to do. So I think this video is probably poorly timed, and I don't think the message is going to quite be received the way that Florida fans hope that it will be, or maybe even Dan Mullen hopes that it will be. And with that, we'll kind of wrap up our SEC through. And with that, we'll sort of turn our attention back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marcos Pizza, to the Georgia game in hand on Saturday against Middle Tennessee State. Thankfully, the Georgia standard right now seemingly means something altogether different than what it means at Florida, which is good news to UGA fans. And with that in mind, playing Middle Tennessee State on Saturday, I thought Kirby Smart was actually asked a pretty interesting question. Can you expect anything you see from Middle Tennessee State to in any way prepare you for what's going to happen on the road next week at Missouri? An altogether tougher opponent and an altogether more important game. Kirby Smart says, no, not really. Here is his answer in regards to that.
No, not at all. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't honestly know, because I don't know a whole lot about what Missouri's doing. I know what they've done in the past, but they've got a new coordinator, so I hadn't had the opportunity to watch much of Missouri's tape. So we're concerned with Middle Tennessee, and they got a good football team, good system, and a lot of respect for Coach Stock and Tony Franklin. They do a good job. It's a very different offense than we faced.
So obviously what we know here is that Kirby Smart's telling the truth when he says that he hasn't been watching Missouri film yet. I believe that's probably true. And yet we also know that he employs an army of analysts, and I'm sure that somebody on that staff has been watching a lot of Missouri film this week to get everybody in the coaching staff up to speed for Sunday when you do turn the page from Middle Tennessee State to the Missouri Tigers. Now, if I look ahead to Missouri, which I'm allowed to do, Kirby Smart, the coaches the players, they can't do that. They've got to keep their attention squarely on Middle Tennessee State for right now. But here on DawgNation Daily, we can kind of peek ahead just a little bit to what's going to happen the following Saturday against Missouri. This is still a game that I feel pretty confident about Georgia in, even on the road, even against Drew Lock, who might be a first-round quarterback. I do take Kirby Smart seriously when he says, don't assume that what you're going to see from a passing team like Middle Tennessee State is all that similar to what you're going to see next Saturday against Missouri. Be that as it may, it's still another chance to see Georgia against an offense that's going to try to move the football and see if it can sort of solidify some of the things with its inside linebackers who had maybe an uneven performance against Missouri last week, or I should say South Carolina last week, and of course Tyson Campbell that got beat on a couple touchdowns. So another tune-up to sort of get ready for that. I'd also say in terms of being, from a fan's perspective, ready for Missouri next week, watch them on the road at Purdue on Saturday. I think this is a pretty good test for a Purdue team that beat Missouri a year ago, now having to go to West Lafayette to play that game. We'll actually find out a little bit about Missouri playing against Purdue on Saturday. That should be kind of fun. All right, for now, though, let's get ready to wrap up our program, wrap up our week. Of course, I'll see you tomorrow in Athens for the dog walk before the game for our Kroger kickoff, after the game for the Northside Hospital postgame show. Looking forward to having you as a part of all that. Jeff Sintel, Cameron Nizelak, of course, the written work from Chip Towers and Mike Griffith. We're all over the place in Athens tomorrow. Also excited about 43 days from right now when Georgia beats Florida again. We love doing the Gator Hitter Countdown right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marcos Pizza. And then let me also, say I'm looking forward to a couple other national games here this weekend. I think Ohio State probably handles TCU easily tomorrow. That's my guess on that. Watch Oklahoma on the road at Iowa State tomorrow. A lot of ranked teams playing away from home. Oklahoma against an Iowa State team that's beaten the Sooners before. USC Texas should be a little bit fun. Washington also on the road at Utah. That should be fun. I also love San Diego State against Arizona State for what it's worth, but that's probably a different topic for a different day. I'll see you back Monday for DawgNation Daily. And on video, good to have you with us here on the program. Got some time for some comments if you would like to opine on your thoughts about the Georgia football program here right now. Anything you kind of want to weigh in on, we'll give you a chance to do that. Jacob McMillan on my point about Ohio State says, Ohio State's overrated as usual. Listen, obviously around here at DawgNation Daily, we're no fan of Urban Meyer, no fan of Ohio State. If I had to guess, I do believe Ohio State's going to send a bit of a message tomorrow. I don't really respect Big 12 football, even a good coach like Gary Patterson, even a good team like TCU, and TCU's been a good team for a while here now. They have been great typically as an underdog, but that's against other Big 12 teams. I just think that Ohio State plays a brand of football that's very hard for TCU to match. I don't like praising Ohio State, but the fact of the matter is the elite Big Ten team just plays a more authentic brand of football, I think, than a lot of the sort of, pillow fight finesse version of the Big 12 here. So I think it's a blowout win. it's not a true road game because I guess they're playing at Jerry World, I think. But it is in Fort Worth tomorrow, or near the TCU campus. Blowout win, one final game without Urban Meyer. Then he returns next week, and I think that Ohio State's a real formidable challenge here for Georgia. I mean, I think that you see right now a national elite that certainly includes at least two SEC teams, Alabama and Georgia. We'll find out over the course of the next couple of weeks if it includes a third with Auburn. I think we know Clemson's in that group, despite the fact that they scuffled a bit with A&M on the road last week. And I think that Ohio State's going to really emerge starting this Saturday and more as that team kind of in that group. And then we'll decide, does Oklahoma fit in there? Is there a team from the Pac-12 that fits in that discussion? But the real demarcation of national elite, I think, is starting to take place. Let me get this comment because I think it's pretty interesting. It comes from Stephen Cumby, who says, who do you think will win the Tennessee-Florida game? That game will decide the worst team in the East besides Vanderbilt. Yeah, I think it really will. And with all due respect, I'm not quite so sure that one of those teams does end up being worse than Vanderbilt. We'll find out a bit about Vanderbilt as well on the road as about a 2-touchdown underdog against Notre Dame on Saturday. I think your guess is as good as mine as far as who wins the Florida-Tennessee game right now. I think that's a pretty tough game to handicap and predict. I still think Florida's probably got a little more talent than Tennessee does. By the way, that game's next Saturday for those of you who are curious. I still think Florida probably brings a bit more to the table than Tennessee does, especially with the injury to Brandon Kennedy. Tennessee just needs all the help that it can get, and it lost a starting offensive lineman recently. It's another sort of cupcake paycheck type game for Tennessee on Saturday. Let's watch Jerry Garantano on Saturday a bit. Let's see if he ends up looking a little more polished and poised than Felipe Franks does against Colorado State. Maybe that gives Tennessee more of a chance to win. The truth is, I'm going to end up being wrong. And my record on picking quarterback battles is lousy. If you want to go back and look the last couple of years, I mean, I'm not telling you I'm great on any prediction, but my quarterback predictions have been wrong. I predicted Malik Zaire to be the starter at Florida last year. That didn't happen. I predicted Keller Chris to win the starting job at Tennessee this year. It looks like that's probably not going to happen. I took Mond over Starkel last year. I was wrong about that. Now, Mond looked pretty good, I think, on Saturday against Clemson. So my record on quarterbacks hasn't exactly been so good as of late in terms of who's going to win these starting jobs. But Garantano, I guess, is going to be the guy for Tennessee. Let's watch him in a tune-up game tomorrow to see if he looks like he's good enough to outduel, and I say that in very much, air quotes, outduel Felipe Franks next week. That should be kind of interesting. Robert Barnes, by the way, riversiding me on the TCU-Ohio State game. He says he thinks TCU makes a game out of it, so we'll see about that. Shane Guy says that, what do you think about Bobo going in and beating Florida? By the way, if you want to know how not exciting the Georgia game is, the fact that virtually every comment right now is about a different game sort of tells you everything you need to know about that. Listen, there is nobody who would love to see Mike Bobo stand victorious on the Swamp tomorrow than me. I just don't think it's going to happen. If Florida's not motivated to get up for Colorado State after really not looking very good at all last week against Kentucky, then you might as well just, sort of fold that place up and put it in your pocket because unfortunately, Colorado State's probably not quite as good as it looked last week against Arkansas. Arkansas is also terrible, by the way. That's an entirely different level, even beneath Florida right now. So I'd love to see Bobo get the win there, but I just don't quite think it's good enough to do. Cole Roster asks a very fair question about Urban Meyer. I think that's a very fair point for sure. Some of y'all are, I guess, arguing about something. I'm not quite sure what that is. Faith Fam Goon says Richard LeCount and J.R. Reed are going to be two of the best safeties in the SEC, and Georgia will have the best secondary in the NCAA. What do you think? I guarantee you this. We already know that J.R. Reed's good, and I think that you can read what's been written at DawgNation.com this week from, Mike Griffith, Conor Riley, everybody else. Richard LeCount really impressed a lot of folks last Saturday. And, I've told y'all before, I don't really think of myself as like the kind of guy that's an expert that's going to break down game film. I just don't try to portray that message because I think there's a degree to which that would be inauthentic. Now, I'm working and studying and learning every day to try to, know more about this game. But, the one thing I'm not going to try to do is say, hey, trust me as some sort of like expert breaking down game film. That's not my deal necessarily. I'd love to one day have that level of expertise. Don't really think I have that now. However, there is also an element of what Richard LeCounte did on Saturday that not only do you not have to be an expert on breaking down game film, you don't even have to watch the TV broadcast. I mean, I told you before during the regular show that, you know, I like to try to go back and rewatch these games when I can. You get a different perspective seeing it for a second time or seeing it isolated with a camera. LeCounte pops in person, in real life, and maybe even more so than he does on TV. I think for those who were in South Carolina last week, you may have gotten a perspective on LeCounte that the TV broadcast did not pick up because, you know, the camera is sort of obviously, you know, following the ball. It's kind of, you know, isolated on a very small portion of the field. What you can't see maybe on the TV broadcast is how quickly LeCounte is like covering ground. You know, you got a cornerback and oftentimes matched up in a man situation with a wide receiver, and LeCounte's coming over to provide help or to sort of, you know, be a second guy in on that play there. And the degree to which he just closing the football is really dramatic. So I hope the TV broadcast did that justice because, man, oh man, we already knew that LeCounte was a pretty tough guy. Boy, he really runs. He really runs. Not a sprinter the way that that Tyson Campbell is, but just a guy that has a desire to get there. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just a guy that, you know, sort of, you know, as the old TV broadcasters used to say, he just sort of gets on his horse and gets there. He really does a pretty good job with that. So he's really fun to watch right now. Laura Woodard trying to get rid of some tickets. Laura, good luck on that, and good luck to your kids playing football there. Miriam Martin Corbin says, looking forward to seeing a lot of our talented freshmen play tomorrow. Cade Mays was awesome last week. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. Chad Williams says I should let Eddie pick quarterback. Yeah, at this point in time, in terms of these starting quarterback battles, Eddie couldn't do any worse than me, I don't think. Look, where did Matt Rugavina's comment go? I wanted to get Matt's comment. Where is Matt's comment? Here it is. He says, do both Swift and Holyfield get 100 yards tomorrow? I say yes. I'd like to see that. I mean, you know, I'm not, to be honest with you, I don't exactly know what Georgia's rushing total is thus far this season, but I think, you know, Georgia's going to play some close games eventually. I mean, LSU's going to be that, at least for a while. Auburn's likely going to be that. SEC championship could be one of the all-time great knockdown dragouts, and who's to say what comes beyond that? You know, the question I've sort of asked in some form or fashion a lot is, can Georgia, through a combination of a few different backs, come close to matching last year's rushing total? You know, where you had, you know, Chubb and Michelle well over 1,000. What did Swift chip in with, about 400 or 500 a year ago? You know, can you sort of get into that total somehow? Can you really have those big rushing totals emerge here? So seeing a little bit more from Swift in that regard, seeing a bit more from Holyfield in that regard, you know, I think that'd be kind of a cool thing to see. Now, I think the running backs are dealing in some measure with the same thing the receivers are dealing with. There are so many guys that are worth getting carries to that everyone's stats get depressed in the aftermath of that. So I think that's a really fair question. I also just realized I haven't even been to YouTube yet, which means I'm going to get roasted by the time I get there. So let me click on this. We are going to have to get out something close to on time today because we got 1,000 things going on. But let me apologize here. Chase Duckett says Holyfield almost reminds me of freshman Nick Chubb this year. Boy, I tell you what, you know, that obviously that if you're comparing anyone to freshman Nick Chubb, that's a pretty high cotton comparison. Chubb, what did he go, 1,400 yards that year? By the way, and fishing with Tiny Bass reminds me, almost 600 yards for Swift a year ago. Daniel Moore on YouTube says the Georgia secondary has 2 first-team All-SEC players in Baker and Reed, and 3 5-stars in Campbell, LeCounte, and Gibbs. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of All-SEC guys on that defense, I believe, by the time the year's over. And frankly, the preseason All-SEC may not have done Georgia a lot of justice on that. I can't remember if DeAndre Walker was the first team or a first-team preseason or not. He was second team. So Walker was the second team. I think he has a chance to be a first-team outside linebacker. And honestly, the difference between like first team and second team is probably not that great. Sometimes guys who do what I do for a living probably make more of that than it is. But you're going to have a pretty good representation, I would think, of all SEC type guys coming off that Georgia defense. BA's daddy says that after the win against Florida, Eddie should go eye patch. I think it is kind of funny, like how Eddie sort of evolved over the course of the time that he's been here. He's had a cast. He's got a Gatorator sign now. He's actually got a different blindfold than he had to start with. There's probably no telling what he's going to be dressed in by the time the year's over with. K9 Blue says YouTube is better than Facebook. Listen, I try to be relatively platform agnostic. You know, I like for people to enjoy the show, whichever platform they enjoy. It's a whole lot heck of it easier to read comments on YouTube. I will tell you that. But I want people to enjoy the platform they enjoy. Dapper Dan says about Holyfield and Swift, they only get 100 yards if they have some big runs for half the field. You know, that's kind of interesting. I guess the one thing, Dapper, that I don't feel like I have a good confidence to answer, Georgia threw the ball 45% of the time against Austin Peay. For some reason, I can't quite imagine Georgia throwing the ball that much this Saturday. I mean, Middle Tennessee State is just a little bit better team. As I've said, you know, they've got, I think, Power 5 wins each of the last 2 years. Now, they're not going to beat Georgia, but they've got Power 5 wins each of the last 2 years. They've also lost to Vanderbilt like 3 years in a row or something like that. So, I mean, you know, this is not the worst non-Power 5 opponent you could play. So my guess is Georgia probably runs the ball a little bit more. It knew it didn't have to against Austin Peay. I'm not telling you it has to run to win against Middle Tennessee State, but maybe just sort of build that big, comfortable lead early. Maybe we see some of that. Chase Duckett with a strong prediction. Y'all know I love hot takes in the comment section. Chase says James Cook may be the leading rusher tomorrow. If that's the case, we got something to talk about on Monday, y'all. Real Caged, also on YouTube, says not all passes are equal, and that's true. I told you I'm kind of working on a little bit of a deep dive for my By the Numbers piece this week in terms of how Demetrius Robertson's been used. One of the other things that you notice when you go back and look at not just the completions for Georgia quarterback this season, but the actual targets, Georgia's targeting running backs. For those of you who've sort of said, why isn't Georgia throwing the ball to running backs out of the backfield a lot more? This year, Georgia's targeting running backs at a pretty high clip here. So that may be something else that we see a lot more of as well, is that throwing the ball to running backs. We've seen Harrion and Swift, Holyfield, Cook. I think all four of those guys have caught passes, and all those running backs have been targeted multiple times here. Kid says I downplay YouTube by saying comments are easier to read because Facebook has more commenters. It is true that Facebook has a lot more commenters. I won't deny that. That's obviously one of the reasons why the gravitational pull is towards Facebook in the comment section, because there just are a lot more commenters. But as I've said before, and y'all don't care about this doesn't matter to y'all at Hill of Beans. I do realize this. But a few months ago, Facebook changed the way that it populates the comments. It used to populate new comments at the top. Now it populates new comments at the bottom. It drives me insane. It's become very hard to read Facebook comments. And I got to tell you something. I'm pretty hard on myself from time to time. I'm probably the most self-deprecating guy that, does what I do for a living. The one thing I'm pretty good at is reading Facebook comments on the fly. I'm pretty good at doing that. But when Facebook sort of changes its sort of distribution method, it makes it a little bit harder for me to do. Pine Saw Lemon Scent says, BA, I think Fromm should throw between 20 to 25 times per game. Pine Saw, I think that's a really interesting comment. Here's how I'd respond to that. I'm not so sure he should. I mean, I think the final score a lot of times dictates how much Georgia feels like it needs to throw. But I would love to live in an alternate universe where he did. You understand what I'm saying? I'd love to sort of create a computer simulation where Georgia built its offense around Jake Fromm throwing behind this offensive line to these wide receivers. I'm not quite so sure that's the best strategy for Georgia to win a national championship in real life, but in some sort of alternate universe, I'd love to see what that offense looks like, because I truly believe that Fromm could get the job done. Now, Georgia, the way it has its offense designed right now, is probably the perfect combination, given who it's playing and given, the way that it kind of wants to go about its business. But I am just sort of curious of what Georgia would look like throwing deep more, throwing more often. Maybe in a big game, certainly in second halves of big games, we may see more of that from Fromm here this season. But I would love to see some sort of simulation of a more pass-happy Georgia offense. I'm not sure I want to see that against LSU and the games that really matter here this season, but in terms of just from a curiosity standpoint, I'd love to see it. Raymond Cox has a prediction. He says 48-10, Dogs win. I think that's a pretty good prediction there, Raymond, on that. I guess I'll say the same thing about this game that I said about the Austin Peay game. I think 2 scores is going to disappoint some Georgia fans, even if it's just a touchdown and a field goal. I think some Georgia fans are sort of hoping to see the number for the other side a little lower than that. But that's a pretty good prediction for sure. You guys are always great with your comments. I really appreciate that. The conversation we're able to have here is always a lot of fun for me. I look forward to continuing with you tomorrow. They're in Athens for everything happening around the Georgia Middle Tennessee State game, including the forum, by the way. At forum.dawgnation.com, we'll have our sort of in-game thread going. This was a lot of fun last week, and I know it'll be a lot of fun again this week here as well. So make sure you check that out. If you've never visited the forum during a game, I actually think you'll really like it. Jeff from On the Field, me from the press box, Connor Riley kind of in the mix there as well. A lot of photos, just a lot of cool stuff that you can sort of only get there in the forum. So please check that out. We'll have DN90 coming up later on today. Dog Walk tomorrow. Northside Hospital postgame show. Cameron Nislett going to be back for that. And then back again here on Monday at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live. Y'all have a great day.